Next up, we have Lauren Douglas, who is SVP of Marketing at Channel Factory. Lauren is going to be talking about brand suitability and how to find your audience. So over to Lauren.
Hello there, DMEXCO and MadFest team. Thank you so much for having me. I think that it's an interesting kind of work. It works really well with the prior topic to talk about brand suitability, because I think when a brand is being purpose-driven, they also want to make sure that they're making purpose-driven decisions about their media investments. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about brand suitability. First, I have a bit of a fun video to sort of show you what does brand suitability look like. So I'm going to go ahead and cue that up.
2 or 3 stitches, but it's all basically the exact same stitch.
Hey, you need a boost like Mega 24 Energy Drink Liquid Rocket.
We really needed to get away.
That's why we fell in love with Greenland,
where the sun never sets.
Nothing makes barbecue like Redford Ranch prime meats. We'll deliver the freshest cuts of USDA prime meat right to your door.
Got a broken plank? Well then visit linksrus.com for all your pirate needs. Use promo code ShiverMeTimbers for free shipping.
Now that's a good deal.
So I think that what you can see from that video, it's a bit of a fun way to talk about brand suitability, but one of the key examples of it was Dracula, and he's being offered an ad to go to Greenland where the sun never sets. And so obviously that is not a great place for Dracula to go. So I think that, a lot of times people think about brand suitability and contextual suitability, and you forget to think about, it's really about finding your right audience. So, it would have probably been better for Dracula to have been served an ad about the darkness or about traveling to Transylvania, right? Same thing with the pirate. You can see at the end that the pirate is, finally gets served an ad about planks, right? And so I think that the idea here is really you want to find your right audience by surrounding the right content. So find the right content, find the right context, and find the right audience. And the reason that this matters for brands is because you certainly don't want to be a brand that shows up against the wrong content, because it could ultimately end up tarnishing your reputation and hurting the message that you're trying to push. And it also really performs better when you do surround that right content. So just really quickly, before we end, I want to show you really what the difference between brand safety and brand suitability are. On the left, you have brand safety. That's things that I want to avoid. And that's content like illicit activity, right? Every brand wants to avoid that. When you talk about brand suitability, that's really finding the right content for your audience. So going back to our example of Dracula, that's finding the right, the right content to advertise to Dracula against. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. Spot on time. Well done. So first up, I have a question from the audience, leaning on your point around finding audiences. So the landscape is becoming increasingly fragmented and more complicated. So what can advertisers do to make sure they actually find the audience that's most suitable to them, an audience that's more likely to buy their products?
Absolutely. I think it's important to build what we like to call inclusion lists. And so that is, if you think about a platform like YouTube, that's building a list that's really inclusive of certain channels that your audience would be against. So if, let's say you're going for millennial moms, you're going to put together an inclusion list of channels where millennial moms might be. You're probably not going to add, hunting channels on there, right? It's probably going to be more around parenting websites, or even sites like Vogue or Elle. And so really thinking about building an inclusive strategy that can connect to your audience where they are.
Great, thank you, Lauren. And I guess in some ways with the third-party cookie probably going away sometime soon, contextual targeting will probably come back as a key technique and tactic for advertisers, whilst it maybe has kind of gone to the back of people's minds. How do you think people should rethink and reset about what contextual targeting is today versus maybe what it was a decade ago?
Absolutely. I think that contextual targeting already is back. I think there is so much concern about the cookie. And so I think that, it makes a lot of sense to people inherently that they want to be around the content that makes sense. It's kind of like when TV advertisers used to select their target demo based on who was watching that content at night. And so, the internet swung in a big way towards towards audience targeting, and I think the pendulum is swinging back because I think that brands want to show up against the right content for their brand. It just makes sense, right? So if you're an electric car manufacturer, you don't want to show up against climate change or climate denial content, right? You want to show up against the right type of content for your brand. So I think that in a big way, it's coming back. And I think in a smarter way now, because people are being more specific about how they're building out their inclusion lists. And I think it's definitely much more intelligent than it was, 15 years ago when the internet first started.
Great. That's a great way to think about it. And one of our audience attendees has asked a question around the walled gardens that I touched on in my opening, that how do you actually make sure that this is delivered on Facebook and Google, where, let's face it, there's a lot of challenges and a lot of furore around the content and the type of content. How do brands make sure they don't appear next to comments or posts that are potentially hate-driven or racism-driven?
100%. I think that's a great question. I think that on a platform like YouTube, for example, I think you build those inclusion lists with the channels and videos that make the most sense. And what a company like Channel Factory does is we look at things like metadata, tags, targeting, even audience sentiment. So if you have a low audience sentiment on your video, you're probably not going to want to advertise against that, right? We even look at quality. So if your quality of your video is shot on a cell phone device, right? That's probably not something that a brand is going to want to advertise against. Right. So I think it's really important to look at all of those factors when you're making a decision about what content that you want to proactively surround.
Amazing. Thank you, Lauren. We are approaching the end, so I won't ask you to fit another question in 15 seconds. So really appreciate you joining us this morning.
Thank you very much. Have a good one.